Hi, it's Dennis Daly. When I was doing my weekly On the Road show, an editor friend of mine said you have to go to this wonderful old warehouse building that has been converted into a used and new bookstore, and it has a coffee shop, and people come in and speak. Well, if that sounds kind of normal now, it wasn't 15 years ago when I went to Denver.
It is crisp and cool here. I am standing on a rather busy street corner in the old section of Denver. In front of me is the classic Union Station, which has been restored and is being used for a variety of things. One wing of it is a TGI Fridays now. But behind me, and this is why we are here, is an old 5-story storage area, a distribution center that at one time had an awful lot of food and supplies going in and out of it. Now, it is one of the nation's best-known bookstores, the Tattered Cover. The reason I'm here is my cohort Bill Clough said, why don't you go to Denver and do a story about the Tattered Cover, because he relies on that bookstore a lot to find books that are nearly out of print. So we are here, and we're going to talk about bookstores and how they've changed over the years on this week's American Montage. Inside this old brick building is the Tattered Cover Bookstore. Mark Miller is one of the directors of this establishment. Let's go through the bookstore with Mark and talk about how bookstores have changed over the years, how they have coffee shops in them now and electronic inventory control. Mark is a personable fellow, and I wanted to talk first about the history of this classic building that houses the Tattered Cover.
It was called the Maury Mercantile, and they had all kinds of different grocery goods. They were grocery wholesalers, and they had all different types of things, spices, coffees. They had their own brand name called Solitaire, which on some of these buildings you can still see the Solitaire brand name kind of ingrained on the buildings. And
well, just as an aside, and this has nothing to do with books, but there's something interesting. If we can walk over here, we're looking out one of the big picture windows here on the corner, the building across the street, which says Barteldus. How are they pronouncing that? Do you know?
Well, I'm not exactly sure.
It's Bartelde, Barteld's. There's an entrance at the second floor that's no longer used. Can you tell us why that's there? I found that pretty interesting.
Yes, well, actually, on that building as well as on the second floor of our building, there was an old viaduct. It was the 16th Street Viaduct, and it used to have all the the trolley cars used to go by there.
Kind of like an L in Chicago.
Right. And until just a few years ago, actually, there were cars and buses that were using it, and those there was the entrance on the second floor of those buildings right from the viaduct.
If you've ever been to Kansas City, there's an interesting thing there downtown. They have so many railroad tracks. I think it's Grand Avenue. There's a huge bridge that crosses the area and takes a long time to get back down to ground level, and there are entrances to buildings. But if you look underneath, you see that before that overpass was built, everything was on the level with the railroad track. So they actually put the entrances are now in the second story of those buildings. Well, let's get to the matter at hand. I decided to visit here on the strength of a recommendation. One of my cohorts at UPI Radio, Bill Clough, who lived in Estes Park for a long time, fell in love with this place and said whenever he was in Denver, he came down here. How long has the Tattered Cover Bookstore been here?
Well, the Tattered Cover has been in Denver since 1971. The current owner, Joyce Meskis, bought it in 1974. It was a small shop then on 2nd Avenue, one location. It was about 950 square feet, to give you a sense of how it's grown since then.
Almost a closet compared to this place.
That's right, yeah. This our Cherry Creek location now has about 40,000 square feet of retail, and this lower downtown location has about 35,000 square feet of retail. So it's grown quite a bit over the last 22 years.
I shouldn't say this, but I'm not much of a reader myself. The phrase voracious reader doesn't apply to me. I was amazed about 10 years ago going into a bookstore in Washington, D.C., and this will really make me sound naive, at just how many titles there are. I mean, you go to a section on maps, for example, or photos, and it's not just 2 or 3 books. There are 20 or 30 that people have written on those topics.
Yes, well, it's certain the number of titles certainly has increased. We normally stock around 175 to 200,000 titles. We have about 300,000 in our title base, but even with that large number, it's still a small part of what's available. There are probably over 1 million books in print in the United States alone. So it's even though a bookstore like this can hold a lot of titles, there's still a lot more that are out there.
We're talking about the way bookstores have changed and evolved. I mentioned to Matt there seemed to be a computer on every table, and that was helping, if in no other way, at least to help in the inventory.
Sure, it's the inventory control is what we have on the computers and the inventory system, and it has made a tremendous difference in terms of the amounts of information that can give us in terms of how things are selling and how fast they're selling, and it allows any store to control its cash a little bit better because it's not on a paper system.
Let's get into a couple of areas here. We could probably spend 5 or 6 hours. Here is a section, for example, just on Colorado. A lot of it photographs. My listeners know that I'm very much into old highways and streets. Here's one just called Denver Streets. It's got a lot of map. My goodness, how thick that one is. The Golden Anniversary Brand Book of Denver. What kinds of readers go in for history, for example? Is it mostly people in my age bracket? Is it pretty much across the board?
Well, I think, I would say it's across the board. It's anyone who's interested in history. This particular section, Colorado or Denver history, I think is of great interest, not only to residents here, but for people passing through and go to a certain area and really want to read a little bit more about it. And Denver has this unique history. Denver and Colorado certainly has a unique history.
Now, here's something that would make me want to pick this up. This is called the seamy side of Denver.
Yes, and I think we're actually standing in what was formerly the seamy side of Denver. This was actually a red light district in these streets down here.
Good heavens! And then there's one. Here's one. Jeep trails to Colorado ghost towns.
Right. It's there are lots of old mining towns and that have been abandoned, but then people like to just get into their Jeeps and take off and discover those old ghost towns.
Well, if you haven't been to Colorado or Wyoming or Montana, I don't think you realize just how, if not popular, at least necessary, four-wheel drives like Broncos are out here.
That's true. It's sometimes feels like somewhat of a symbol of being a Coloradan, even if you don't go up to the mountains, even if you're just going around town, you need a four-wheel drive. Just in case it does we actually have a blizzard.
Oh, and you do from time to time. Matt, here's a great section here. This is on puzzles, crossword puzzles. There's a old board game Clue up there. Is that an increasing part of the market, what you might call brain teasers, the whole word search kind of thing?
Well, I think there's been a consistent interest in word games. You'll see as part of this section there are books on gambling, which has increased a lot since there has been gambling that is in Colorado now. But
everybody wants to know how to beat the odds.
Right. But I think there's a continued interest in that, and crossword puzzles are consistently good sellers.
I notice there's a whole line of books out, Things for Dummies, which is here's the Life for Dummies. There's Computers for Dummies. I wish I'd bought into that project early on.
Yes, I was just talking to someone this morning who had that idea that he should write a book for computer users that was very simple, but he didn't use the word dummy, so I don't think it ever took off. Not
every bookstore has this, and this is a selection of greeting cards.
Yes, we find that our customers really enjoy having a good selection of cards to choose from for all occasions. Actually, we stock a lot for the holidays, but we have them all year round for general use.
Matt, how many floors do you occupy here?
We have in this building actually has 3 floors of retail space. Part of this development, which Joyce, the owner of the store, has a small share in the whole building, and above our bookstore are actually apartments that have recently opened, and they're actually rental apartments, some of which are for low-income housing. So,
well, good heavens, if you're a bookworm, though, that's the ideal place to live.
Just come downstairs.
One of the managers of the Tattered Cover Bookstore is Matt Miller. I continued my discussion with him as we walked around the ever-growing big store right across from the old Union Station in downtown Denver. We could just, as I say, spend hours here. One of the other topic areas that has always been a mainstay of bookstores has been military books.
Yeah.
In Washington, D.C., one of the bookstores I go to, there must be 2 walls of nothing but Civil War. And here you have everything from the First World War back to the Civil War. And some of the photography in printing anymore is absolutely amazing.
Yes, well, the Civil War books continue to amaze us. I think throughout the country, there are always those Civil War history buffs and people who like to reenact battles, and I think that's a strong interest here in Colorado also.
Matt, what is your background? How did you get interested in all of this? Do you want to be a dentist first and then decide that the printed word was more your style, or what happened along the way?
Well, it was just kind of somehow a natural evolution. I was interested when I was in school in psychology and in literature, and I actually was a daycare director and teacher for several years before I started working at the Tattered Cover, and I started here when it was a pretty small store. Actually, there were 9 other people employed here as compared to about 400 that work here now. So it's just my love of books and just that continued interest in learning, and I think that's one of the fortunate things about being here and being around books is there's always something new to learn.
I don't want to open a Pandora's box here, but have you come up against any opposition as far as what you have here? I mean, not that a bookstore is a place where people are going to read things they shouldn't, but they're obviously, we see this, I guess, more in curriculum in schools, but do you ever have people who come in and say, I don't think that book ought to be there?
Sure, we do, and it's fortunately not very often, but there are, as we said before, there are thousands of titles, so there's the potential for having something in here that is
it's going to offend somebody.
Yeah, offensive to someone is pretty high, but I guess we feel very strongly that we're here to provide books and to let our customers make those choices and not make those decisions for them.
Matt, what part of book selling and all of the things that go with it, record albums, calendars, posters, is the result of the pop culture? I notice you have a whole section here on, well, not just Star Trek, but there's Marilyn Monroe and Elvis and a lot of other things.
Well, there's continually that interest in the past, the reminiscing, and as well as for the pop culture now. We're looking at calendars, and these are our pop culture calendars. But calendars is one of those areas that really has expanded a lot over the last few years. We probably carry over 2,000 different types of calendars for the holidays.
I like the ones that have a page for every day.
Yes, those are wonderful, and those have been selling well for us too.
You know, I bring this up on almost every program. I'm kind of on a one-man crusade to get the world to recognize that the next century actually begins in 2001. That we actually have an extra year left to unwind.
That's right. Well, you better change your New Year's Eve reservations.
Boy, there's just so much here. We're moving away from books into periodicals. I know I was in a very, very crowded bookstore in downtown Manhattan about this time last year, talking, as a matter of fact, to the president of the trying to remember the name of the group. It's kind of the umbrella group for magazine, the American Magazine Publishers Association, I guess, Don Kummerfeld. And he was mentioning, as we looked at a wall of computer magazines, that 25 years ago, there was maybe 1 or 2 of those, and maybe something in popular mechanics. But boy, you talk about an area that's just come from out of nowhere.
Yes, and I think that's probably our best-selling area right now. It's the computer books, computer magazines also. It's we see our highest sales increases continue to be with computer books.
What about things electronic? I was at Encyclopedia Britannica earlier this year, and they were showing me how there's actually now the hardcover version and the CD-ROM, and you can get into it on internet. If you would, talk about the whole coming of the electronic age to how people access material now, and what kind of requests you get here.
Well, we do get some requests for that. We do stock some of those materials, the CD-ROM materials, and although it's not a large part of our market, but there has been continuing interest. It'll be interesting to see. I think this the whole expansion of that market and interest in the internet.
Matt Miller, one of the things I've noticed here is you have a coffee bar.
Yes.
And this is not the first one inside a bookstore I've seen, but it's such a natural marriage because the whole, to me, ambiance, I guess, of reading is such a genteel thing in a way. You want to sit down, talk about the books you've read, and relax. It just really lends itself to a good time here. I mentioned to Matt that there's a coffee shop there. Certainly not the invention of the tattered cover. You see coffee shops everywhere in bookstores now, but it certainly adds to the ambiance and creates a really nice, genteel atmosphere.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's something we feel comfortable with. We had talked about putting coffee or some type of coffee bar into a bookstore for probably 15 years, and of course there are lots of bookstores that have them now. But yeah, this does feel like it's a very comfortable mix for us, and again, just trying to provide another service for our customers that some things that they have requested over the years.
Getting back to the computer things we were talking about before, would you say that in your years of book selling, that has, along with the electronic aspects of things, particularly inventory, that has been the big change in what people are asking for?
Well, that certainly has been a remarkable change in terms of those types of books. It was interesting when the computer books first came out. They actually didn't do very well in many bookstores, and as they and a lot of bookstores tried them for a while, and then stopped carrying them, and then there was a resurgence. And I think now for many bookstores who've chosen to carry a broad selection, it really has been successful for them.
Well, and a lot of those early titles came and went. One of the things Don Kummerfeld was telling me is the number of magazine titles that come in a period of a year and a year later aren't there anymore.
Yes.
They just didn't attract the audience or the advertisers, or something just didn't click.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not in the magazine publishing business, so I'm not exactly sure what makes it click. But I think it's well, I don't have.
Well, no. Neither of us has the answer for that. What about mystery novels? The whole John le Carré, that type of spy novel, is that still a pretty big percentage of book sales? You certainly see enough advertising in the newspapers and on radio about that.
Yeah, well, mystery book sales certainly continue to be very strong for us, as well as just other types of fiction. We feel strongly, as you can see, we have a section in the middle of our store, and we always have, even when the store was smaller. We felt it's important to have new hardcover fiction, very very accessible, very visible, and to keep that interest in writing and fiction alive.
You know, one of the things that I find very interesting, and I guess with computers and everything, it's much quicker than it used to be because you don't have to set type. You'll take something like the Simpson trial or some big event, the Pope's trip to the U.S., and all of a sudden, within a week after that's over, 7 different people have a book out about it with photographs in it.
That's right. Those instant books just still amaze us sometimes, but I guess it's kind of like a TV movie. You know, it's happening before the event has stopped.
Now we're going up steps here. What do we have up here on the second floor?
Well, there's a combination of things. We have our nature books, sports books, religion, philosophy,
more computers, yeah,
business, and we also have an events area here, which is a separate events area for lots of author signings that we have and other types of events.
How regularly do you get somebody in, if not of national renown, at least enough to bring in people who want an autographed copy?
Well, it's pretty frequent, actually. This time of the year is our busiest time of the year. We have, between the two stores, actually up to maybe averaging 3 events a day, about 500 or 600 events a year.
Wow. Now, this is a little, they can probably tell by the acoustics here, this is a nice bright, let's sit down for a little bit here, a nice bright area, a little auditorium, if you will, stage and podium up in front, a screen for projections. You get lectures here too, I suppose?
We can. This space actually has just opened up a couple of weeks ago, so we're still trying to feel our way through it. But yeah, it's primarily we're going to be using it for author events, for signings, for just other activities. We do lots of children's events where it's not necessarily an author coming in to sign books, but just things of interest, as well as providing a space for people in the community to meet and book groups and other groups that may be interested in just finding a comfortable place to gather.
You brought up children's events there, and not to sound like an advocate here, and as I said earlier, I'm not much of a reader myself. I guess it's because I read so much news copy at work all the time. But, boy, the way the family has in many places fallen apart because there's either one parent there or neither can be there. They have to work. What do you feel is the role of children's material in enhancing a child's life, particularly a child who has to spend a lot of time alone? What kind of feedback do you get on that?
Well, of course, those readers really begin in those early ages, and that's why we've always felt very strongly about providing a good selection of children's books. It's those early years, and we feel very committed to that. We try to have lots of children's programs. We have children's writing contests and scary story contests, and just story hours every twice a week, and we work with a lot of school groups. We give tours to school groups and try to get kids into bookstores and realize this is a place where it's okay, it's comfortable, it's okay to come and
it's not square to read.
No, it's not square to read, and it's okay for them to come in even and just sit down. We have lots of comfortable chairs and couches around here, and that's intentional. We want people to feel comfortable, and children as well, comfortable to be able to come in here and just look at a book and not feel absolutely obligated to buy it. Of course, at some point we would like some people to buy some books, but it's not required, certainly.
Well, one thing you're creating here, at least as far as being attractive to children, is that this has much less of a sterile aura about it than the standard library has, for example. I think a lot of young kids shy away from the library because they see it kind of as an extension of school in a way.
Well, we feel that it's very important not only for children, but to make a bookstore as comfortable as possible. As you've mentioned, if you don't feel that you're an avid reader, well, there are lots of people who may not feel comfortable in a bookstore, or even walking into a bookstore. So we try as hard as we can to make it as non-threatening as possible, and we have lots of warm colors here and comfortable places to sit down and comfortable carpet, and that's all intentional to make it as a non-threatening environment for children and adults.
I think when I have read, I remember recently reading one of the works of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and just amazed at the way he utilized words. We've lost shades of meaning anymore. People's vocabularies have become so limited. I, being in broadcasting, have a great love of some of the things that Edward R. Murrow wrote. His pictorial, if you will, in words of going into the Buchenwald concentration camp. I mean, you just can't read it without crying almost. And this was in an age before television. There was a great documentary that Ken Burns did, who did the Civil War series. He did a 2-hour documentary called Empire of the Air about 3 men who made radio possible. And one of the comments made by Norman Corwin, who's still alive, he was one of the great writers of radio drama in the 40s, was that a child was asked whether they preferred radio or television, and the child said that he liked radio because the pictures were better. And that's very much the way it is with books. I think in reading, you're not limited to that visual presentation that you see on TV or in the movies, which with the new type of special effects can be absolutely astonishing, but there's nothing like what comes out of your brain. chain.
It's true, and it remains true, and I think that's why bookstores are there's still so much interest in bookstores. People still do like to read, and it's perhaps more people need to be doing it.
Our host is Matt Miller. We've been walking around the store, which is very old in some ways and very new in others, and we continued our discussion. Just in the last 10 to 15 years, the merchandising concept in bookstores has changed to where it is a more friendly atmosphere. And I think, in a way, my feeling is that when you go into a place like this, or even some of the chains now have coffee shops in them and much more knowledgeable personnel than they did, that the bookstore is creating the type of atmosphere that it's not just a place you go to occasionally. It's a place you might meet friends on Thursday nights or make it a regular part of your routine now.
Well, that's true, and there are a lot more bookstores, and that's and I don't know if I should get on a bit of a soapbox here, but I guess we are.
Oh, go ahead.
We are an independent bookstore. It's a locally owned bookstore. It's not part of a chain, and we feel very strongly that the independent bookstore in the United States is very, very important, not just for our own self-interest, which of course there are, but it's we're afraid that if you do not have the variety and of offerings that you can find in many independent bookstores, that what is published will have a narrower and narrower focus. So I guess that's my little plug for the
No, you're
for the value of independent bookstores.
You're perfectly welcome to do that. I think there's some parallel there in a way with what happened to movies in the 40s. A lot of people don't realize that Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, for example, everybody assumed that was a huge company. Well, it was actually owned by Loew's Theaters. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was kind of the tail being wagged by the dog, and what Loew's said was what happened. But the government, there was an antitrust suit filed. The government required that you could not both own a theater chain and own a motion picture production house. So when the theaters were sold off, all of a sudden these automatic places where the movies always were shown died. That meant that if Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer wanted to make a film that was a very artsy kind of film, they knew that it would play in 2,000 theaters. Suddenly the outlets for non-blockbuster movies dried up. And I think maybe that if we were all chain bookstores, then, as you say, authors would only start to write those things that the bookstores thought would sell, and we would much more limit ourselves and really pull our horizons in if that were the case.
Well, that's true, and it's those decisions are made for the chain bookstores usually by a handful of people in a concentrated area for the whole country, and those choices that are made in independent bookstores in terms of what to bring in and what to put on shelves are made by hundreds and hundreds of individual booksellers, independent booksellers throughout the country.
Is there much a demand here away from the traditional urban areas of New York, San Francisco, L.A. for foreign publications? Do you see a demand for that much here?
Well, we do have a strong foreign language section and certainly interest in travel, but also in this part of the country, it's probably the highest interest is in Spanish language books, or sometimes in French as the international languages, but that has been an increasing part of our business.
Something else you do here very well, and Bill Clough on our staff wanted me to compliment a lady named Chris, who works in one of your divisions where they find books that are out of print or hard to find. He uses you a lot when he can't find a book elsewhere. How do you go about finding those out-of-print books or those hard-to-find books for people when they have a request? Do you get on the internet? Do you have a network with other bookstores? How does the detective work come about?
Well, it's a combination of things. Yes, we do have an out-of-print book search service, and it's a combination. There is now actually a computer network for used bookstores, and we put out requests that customers give us and describe the book and the condition of the book that the customer wants, and we get quotations back from individual vendors around the country, as well as doing some advertising in some antiquarian magazines and just getting quotes in. We find that we have about, I about a 35% fulfillment rate of the requests that we receive.
Now, you have an 800 number. I would presume that you ship to other parts of the country.
Yes, actually, we ship throughout the United States, and I believe we actually are shipping to about 30 or 40 different countries outside the United States. We have a large mailing list that actually includes all the 50 states as well as 75 foreign countries.
Books are a fabulous gift a lot of people give. They don't have to be those expensive coffee table books, although those make wonderful gifts. What kinds of books seem to be the most popular this time of year? Maybe not specific authors, some if you know them, but what are the hot-selling, if not books, in addition, hot-selling items you're seeing being requested?
Well, it's always a combination of things. Occasionally there may be one or two books that really take off, but I think it's a combination. Some of the, as we were talking about earlier, some of the pop culture. Oprah Winfrey has a new book, and there's certainly a lot of interest in that. Their biographies always continue to be of good gifts, cookbooks.
We were talking about the kind of gifts people like to give that they buy at bookstores. Matt says quite often they'll get a phone call from someone, or someone will stop in wanting to buy not necessarily something very new, but something very old for a specific sentimental reason.
Sometimes it just comes down to a favorite book, an older work that meant a lot to someone, and they want to pass that imagination and that picture on to other people.
How much advance notice do you get when a book is coming out? When someone like Oprah writes an autobiography, or Richard Simmons comes out with a new book or something, how much advance notice do you get? I guess, of course, you have to make shelf space available, and if you're going to have maybe a theme party or a rush of people in, you have to know when that's going to happen.
Right. Well, it varies, but usually we buy books about, I'd say 4 to 6 months ahead of time. Usually we start hearing about them for the books for the holidays in May or June, and make our decisions at that time. Yes, it's a bit of guesswork, but it's an educated guesswork. We try to work with publishers, gather as much information as we can, and always keeping in mind our customers and trying to think, well, how many people, what kind of people are going to be interested in this, and are those our customers? And that's part of the basis by which we make our decisions.
I would guess when the word starts getting around and people know, hey, there's going to be a book come out by Colin Powell or whoever it is, that you would start getting advance requests. You have people saying, hey, make sure you put one in the back for me?
We do. Sometimes it depends on how early they hear about it. But we're always happy to take those requests.
Matt, what about the Colin Powell book? I heard somebody say that it was selling like hotcakes, and then when he dropped out of the presidential race, you couldn't give the copies away. Did you see that happen here?
Well, we were fortunate. Actually, he came to our store for a signing, and before he announced his decision, so there was still a lot of interest. But
so you rode the wave of that.
Yeah. Although the paperback is out now, and it's still selling well. I think there's still a lot of interest in him as a person, as an individual, and not necessarily as a political leader, perhaps.
What has been your input that you've gotten from kids who come in here, and I want to get back to that for a second, who are discovering reading for the first time? It must be fun to just watch a child browse through and to realize that all of a sudden they found something, maybe found a book on maps or auto mechanics, and it suddenly opens up a whole area they didn't know about before.
It's still one of my favorite sights in the bookstore to walk through the children's section and see a child there sitting on a chair or sitting on the floor and looking at a book, just completely entranced by it. It's still one of the most rewarding things for me to see that connection and realize, well, that it just feels so good, and realize, well, there's someone who really is going to be one of our future readers.
Well, Matt, it's a great place, the Tattered Cover, downtown Denver, in the old section, diagonally across from the restored Union Station. Thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your coming, and it's been a pleasure.
The old Tattered Covered Bookstore in the warehouse section, once in the warehouse section of Denver, Colorado. I'm Dennis Daly.